said, well, we'll talk. I know your son wanted you to move out there, so.
Okay, well, let's start. I guess, Rachel, if you can mute folks. Excellent. Great. So, hello, everyone. I think you all know me. I'm Carol Bass. I'm a co-chair of the Sanctuary Redesign Committee at Becky. And as you know, we've been working since last year to produce a design for our sanctuary that better reflects who we are as a Jewish community and as a prayer community. You know, we're working toward a worship space with more warmth, more inclusiveness, spiritual intimacy, and true egalitarianism. One of the major Was I muted that whole time?
You just got muted after.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay,
I was going to mute somebody else and it moved. Sorry.
That's okay. But I don't have to start over, right?
No.
So one of the major goals of the project is to make the space more accessible and more inclusive for everyone. And the committee has received a lot of good ideas about designing for physical disability. And so tonight, we want your help in thinking about how to accommodate the needs of neurodiverse adults and kids, and people with autism spectrum disorder, people with intellectual disability, and so on. And so we really want to hear from you. This is not going to be, Carol's going to talk a little bit, but this is not going to be a lecture. This is really going to be a discussion because we want to hear from folks with the lived experience. What aspects of our existing sanctuary design work well for people with, let's say, sensory sensitivities and other hallmarks of neurodiversity, and what aspects can be improved. So our expert moderator tonight is our very own Dr. Carol Weitzman. Carol is a developmental behavioral pediatrician. Many of us know her from her longtime work at the Yale School of Medicine, where she was the director of developmental behavioral pediatrics. Now she is a professor emeritus at Yale and is currently co-director of the Autism Spectrum Center at Boston Children's Hospital, Harvard School of Medicine. And because everyone needs more jobs, right? Carol is also director of the Connecticut Center for Developmental Pediatrics. Professionally, Carol has been working on questions of how to design medical settings that work better for neurodiverse patients. And I think she'll tell us a little bit about that as she sets the stage for our discussion.
All right, can I jump in? All right, so the goal for tonight really is to listen. And you know, I'm going to give like 5 minutes of background, but mostly we want to hear from people. I'm looking at who's here, and I know there's a lot of lived experience and expertise amongst people here. So I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. And I do want to just also acknowledge that I think the Redesign Committee has done an amazing job. But let me set the stage a little bit why I brought this to the fore. So when we look at kind of prevalence of autism spectrum disorder, and by the way, what we're talking about is not exclusively for people with autism spectrum disorder, but really with the broader story of neurodevelopmental disability. But when we look at that, we know that right now the prevalence rates, for whatever you want to say about that, is that 1 in 54 children have autism. That includes 1 in 29 boys. It is a very big, broad spectrum, but it is characterized by challenges in social communication and the presence of restrictive and repetitive behaviors. That's sort of how the DSM-5 defines autism. And also we know that within that, there are also very significant for many people sensory sensitivities, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We use this term, and I think we used it in the flyer, about neurodiverse and neurodiversity, and just to kind of make sure we're all grounded in using the same language. This really is simply the idea, you know, that people experience the world and interact with the world in very different ways, and that there isn't necessarily one way that is the only way. But it is very typical that people who do not experience some of these other ways of thinking, learning, feeling in the world we often say we create environments and then expect people to fit into these environments and to modify their behaviors or suppress behaviors to fit into environments. So just to ground this a little bit, what I would say is that right now, again, I told you what the prevalence is in children. There are about 5 million adults right now who have a diagnosis of autism. There's about 7 million adults with intellectual disability. So these are not uncommon issues that we see in the world. And again, I've been involved in working in creating autism-friendly spaces within medical environments for a number of years, and I'm doing a number of, I think, which I'll save for another day, but some really exciting projects about trying to understand how do we change medical environments to be more accommodating to people who do have differences and disability. In the medical setting, and I know that's not what we're talking about here, but I do want to say this is more than just, like, let's make it a nice place. In the medical setting, what happens is that when settings are not accommodating, you see a lot of failed healthcare, more hospitalizations because early problems are not treated, are not detected, reduced access to care, increased risk for injury, avoidable restrictive practices such as seclusion and restraints for children, as well as sometimes very significant trauma, injury, and severe behavior dysregulation. So that's how I kind of got interested in it from the work I do in the area of autism and in healthcare settings. So then I started to think about, as we've been talking about this redesign project, it took me like, I don't know, I'd say probably a really long time, way deep into the project to all of a sudden go, wait a second, how does this stuff apply to thinking about how we design spaces within a synagogue? And I think, Becky is a beautifully welcoming place. And I think we all sort of want to think about our synagogue as being welcoming to all people, sort of, if you will, a holy space for people to come where they feel like they can be themselves and be at home. And I started to wonder, are there people who don't come to synagogue because it is too triggering, because there are things within the synagogue that they are sensitive to, that are modifiable? And that sort of is what triggered this. So just to ground us and then open up the discussion, oftentimes when people think about creating autism-friendly, at least medical environments, these include a number of prongs, sort of creating individualized plans for people, for patients, training and education of staff, sensory accommodations, and then visit preparation. And I think mostly we can talk about anything here. It's not all part of the redesign, but mostly what I think we're going to focus on is looking at the sensory environment and try to understand, are there things that people have noticed that are triggering for families, that they, for people with neurodevelopmental disabilities? What has people's experience been? But often those sensitivities are to things like sound or touch, texture, light. Often people with autism will report a need to move frequently and feel like they are being very disruptive in an environment if there's not a designated place where they feel they can move. Sometimes people will need to or want to engage in repetitive behaviors, stereotypical movements. Sometimes that's to relieve anxiety. Sometimes when there's distress, there's a feeling of a need to escape. Crowded environments can often trigger extreme discomfort. I'm going to hold on naming some of the kinds of accommodations that have been put in place in other environments, because I really would rather, instead of me listing things, hear from people. So I guess what I would say to start this off is, particularly for people with lived experience and families, like, what has your experience been? Are there things that are triggering in the environment? And as we're thinking about, this redesign, are there things that are modifiable without us thinking, oh, let's just go back to the drawing board and start all over, because we're not going to do that. But are there things that people have experienced that they want to comment on? So let's just jump in there. And I don't know if people should raise hands or just jump in. Carol, what do you recommend?
I think the hand raising icon is good if we can manage to see all the screens and see who's raising their hand. And if we don't see you, throw something in the chat and then we'll know that you're trying to get our attention.
Isaiah, were you raising a hand?
Yeah. It's related. I mean, this past Shabbat, we had people from the towers at services, and I was assisting a number of those people. And, you know, we have a pretty good sound system, but they still had trouble hearing what was going on and understanding people. So sound, if there's a way to spread the sound out, to have many, one of the things I think about from this perspective is having many more speakers. And instead of having, mainly we have the speakers up front, you know, and some sort of pattern of sound coming out from there. And it might be better to have the sound broadly spread through the room with smaller speakers, something like that, which might make it more possible for more people to hear better. Just a thought.
Great, thanks, Isaiah. How about Donna, then Eric?
You have to unmute.
Donna, you're muted.
Sorry. I called my daughter before the Zoom and I asked her, so I'll spit it all out because my grandson's on the spectrum. And she actually, as to the sound thing, she said it would be nice if there were areas of the room that were quieter, where the sound wasn't as loud. So maybe some range of sound. The other thing, you know, first thing she said was flexible seating, which her synagogue doesn't have. And, you know, we're going for that. So she also said he likes to be able to watch, but not be part of the crowd, which is something Carol mentioned. So I don't know. I mean, flexible seating allows them to move away, but if they're, I don't know, like where the bookshelves now are designed to be, if there could somehow be a comfortable area where the chair can be pulled behind there, but they could still see, or something like that. Or maybe some chairs set up there or something that people could retreat to. It seems to me that the bookcases would be too high to do that, but some way that there could be a sort of natural semi-barrier. She said the biggest problem they have is that the rabbi would always come up and say, oh, come on up to the front, you know, and like he'd want to leave. So that's the training of staff, of course, and just people accepting that some people may not want to be right in the front or come up for, my kids never came up for Ein Kelo Hainu or whatever, you know, it's shy kids and things like that too. So, but I think she said a few other things, but I think those were the most important, the sound and the ability to be away from the crowd.
Super, thanks, Donna. We have a lot of hands up, so I'm writing down with your hands up and I'll try to go in order. Eric, you gave a double hand. You had your hand and the icon. So
well, I hit the wrong hand. What can you say? Yeah, relative to the sound, that was a circumstance that there's an area of the sanctuary where those folks have, happen to be seated, where by design, you don't get any direct sound from the speakers. There were some people who did not want to benefit from electronics on Shabbat. And so the area right in the middle and towards the front is where you may get a little bit of sound from the speakers, but it was designed to not have sound. Now we can do anything we want, you know, and we're going to be doing quite a bit with putting speakers in different places, and we'll be using this input here for figuring out how to go forward. But it's not an accident they couldn't hear anything. They happened to be sitting in the worst place in the sanctuary to get any kind of amplified sound. It was just an accident. You know, I'm sure the folks who seated them didn't know that.
It's where the kids with autism should sit, but they don't want to be in the front.
But they don't want to be in the front.
So put that.
But I do think the notion of different sound and sort of the sensitivity to that is
yeah. We can design it so that some areas have only a modest amount of sound and others have more.
Yeah, Sharon. And hi, Sharon, by the way.
Hi, hey. I just want to second or third the idea of having different areas that have different volumes, because If the volume is good for the elderly, or for people who are hard of hearing, it will most certainly be terrible for neurodiverse kids on the spectrum who have sound and noise sensitivities. That would be a trigger. And so I really like the idea of having different areas that have different volumes, or the option of having some kind of device in the ear if one needs it. But perhaps if one needs it, they would have it on them.
That's super helpful, Sharon. I would also just put out, and there's a lot of hands up, so I want to get to hear them more than me, but I feel like I hear from an awful lot of patients more about also idiosyncratic sound. So sounds like, like sometimes like when the some of the HVAC stuff, like all of a sudden makes a really loud sound, can be very, triggering for people who have that kind of sound sensitivity. Joanne, how about, go ahead. What did you want? Joanne, do you have your hand up? You're on mute. Do you want to add something, Joanne? You're on mute.
Unmute, Joanne.
Yes. I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay. I wanted to say something about the current sound system with the T-coil. I'm a person who wears hearing aids, and the T-coil is a lifesaver in the sense that I could sit in the front row and I still would not be able to make out the words clearly of the Devartara without the T-coil. And it's wonderful to have it. And it's interesting that, as Eric said, it's only in certain places. I have to be sensitive to where I sit. And I certainly would hope that that would be incorporated into the new sanctuary design. I assume that it would. But I think it's really, as I said, it's been a lifesaver for me.
Michael, did you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you. So couple observations. As a scientist, I don't base things on N equal 1. So I have a lived experience with Shy. 3 things: sound, movement, and change. I agree generally with what's being said about sound, but a point of caution is as he moves around, the change in sound from higher volume to lower volume will present itself most likely as what Carol just described as idiosyncratic sound. So if there are gradients in the sound profile, probably not ideal for people who are hypersensitive to sound. Movement. You've all seen Shai wandering around the synagogue, the sanctuary. He doesn't sit still. He'll sit still for maybe 4 or 5 minutes. And then he'll want to walk around. You've all heard him say, "Can I walk around?" And he'll walk around, and the ability to move around and space to move around, it's wonderful that Becky is accepting of that behavior. We very much appreciate that as a family and as members. On the other hand, whatever changes need to be conducive to allow for that. And the last comment is on change. The one thing that, at least in our experience, any change is devastating. So I am dreading the day that I bring him back and everything's different, because we will likely see a bit of an explosive disruption as a result. Change is a challenge, and so we need to factor that in, at least to some degree, into the thought process. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Michael, as I was like just starting to think about this, and I know we're really talking redesign, but I was thinking to myself, wow, we should be making like social stories, and we should be sending pictures of progress to people who have sensitivity. And we could do that. I mean, it's not that, but like that, because I was thinking to myself, wow, this is going to be so, first of all, it's hard for people who don't have those sensitivities. Change is often difficult. But for people who really, you know, walk out one day and it looks like one thing and walk in, like I thought, oh, we should just make a social story about that. As people don't know what social stories are, they're often used to help people using pictures to kind of prepare for change. And they're pretty effective for neurotypical folks too, and for kids in general, because change is hard for everyone, but for some folks, it's even more difficult. So we can have our social stories committee.
Carol, we're still watching videos of the demolition of the New Haven Coliseum. Literally.
Okay,
I mean,
so we can talk
as
about
recently
that.
as the last week. Yes.
Yeah.
That would be actually very helpful if there was sort of a bridge social YouTube or something. That,
there's just so many things we could talk about to make that kind of transition easier for lots of people, but they're not hard to do, and it's just takes a little planning. Ilana, did you want to comment?
So bouncing off of what, where is she? Bouncing off of what Donna said, with all the young kids going around the shul, I myself occasionally have a short attention span, and so I'll step out to use the ladies' room, or knowing that services is almost over, anticipating that service is almost over, I'll actually go towards the doors. And both Rachel and Ellen have seen me do this. I'll actually go towards the doors, and since I am more high functioning, I will actually do a mitzvah and open the doors for the congregants once shul is over. But going back to what she was saying about the young children, either instead of or in addition to the young children singing Ein Kelohenu, what my parents' shul at home does is that if a child is either too shy, or a family with children is away for, say, away for Yom Tov, for example, if there's either a child that's too shy or a family is away for Shabbos and Yom Tov, it'll be the entire kahila singing together. Like there will be one person from the shul who starts, but then if the volume gets loud enough, it's the entire kahila singing together. And I thought,
Lana, can I clarify, is that desirable or is that not desirable? I'm not sure what you're saying.
Like like it sounds like some of the members are saying they don't always feel comfortable when the children are doing it, but what I'm offering is to do what my home community's method does, which is if there's either not enough children, there's a child too shy to do Ein Kelohenu, or a family is away, it can be the adults doing it together, or maybe someone say like, for example, you, Rabbi Woodward, you could start it, and then it's the entire Kehila doing it together if there are no children around in shul.
Alana, thank you. That's super helpful. Can I ask you a question? You said that sometimes you go out to open the door. Is that just because you like the idea of holding the door open for people, or it is more comfortable for you to leave before everybody goes out at once? I wasn't sure if I understood that.
I personally sometimes get uncomfortable in huge crowds if it's people I don't know. And so, yes, I am getting to know more and more of you, but just for me personally, as a way to either get ahead of the crowd or just to step aside, I'll go ahead and do a mitzvah for all of you and going ahead with Rachel or Ellen and push the doors open at the end of services.
That's lovely. That's very lovely. I'm going to make sure I notice that you're holding the door open the next time, which I don't think I have. So thank you.
It's not that I'm holding the door open. It's that
you're
I'm
opening
pushing it open and then getting the little like door stop thing.
Yes,
it's not that I'm holding the door.
Well, thank you for doing that. That's awesome. All right, there's a bunch of other people. Eyal, how about do you want to chime in?
You're on mute, Eyal.
You're muted, Eyal.
Sorry, I was muted in two distinct ways, and one of those I turned off, and the other one I didn't. So I've got two different issues with the arrangement of seats. So first off, the issue that's not so much that affects everyone really, which is if you've got a U-shaped arrangement of seats. Sorry, I'm gonna move my hands farther away. So, right. So this is actually great because I can use parts of my face to as references. Anyway, so you've got a U-shaped arrangement of seats like my hands, and there's two places for where the speaker could be. They could be right where my nose is, or right between, or in the middle of my forehead. And the thing is, if they're in the middle of my forehead, if they're right here, then the people like over here have to look at quite an angle to see them properly. Whereas if they're in the middle, then you've got people looking at them from all directions. Some of them are looking at the backs of their heads. It just feels like that's a reason why just straight rows is just generally better in this situation. Like if you've got like a really shallow U, that also works, but that's not what we're going after. And the other issue is if you've got the current plan is to have a lot of movable seats. And so the first thing is that fidgeting is going to tend to move those a lot just during the services, which is a minus. And also, more importantly, even ignoring that, they're probably going to be in completely different positions for every single service, which is going to really annoy the people who hate change.
Hey, I'll pause for a second. Let me check in on that for a second with people who know about this more than I do. What is the likelihood that the sanctuary will look different from week to week and that chairs will be moved around? Is that likely or unlikely?
I can address that, and then if the rabbi wants to say something, he can add or contradict me or whatever. And
Al, I want you to finish your thought, but I did want to just check in on that just as it was being said.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Carol. Go ahead and comment on that.
Oh, sure. So the seating arrangements that are shown in the conceptual design sketches are examples of what we might want to do. The seats, as Eyal noted, will be movable. So, as a kahila, we can try an arrangement, and if we don't like it, we can try a different arrangement. Whenever the construction begins, or during whatever the construction period will be, we will not be davening in the sanctuary. We'll be presumably in one of the social halls and on movable seats. So that will give us a great opportunity to try things out and see what works. All of the chairs that we're looking at as potential purchases have links that allow you to attach one each to its neighbor. So the rows will stay more or less in place. They will not be, chairs won't be toppling over every time someone gets up and stuff like that. And I think it's very unlikely that we're going to be changing the arrangement from week to week. I think probably we'll have a basic Shabbat arrangement, maybe an expanded one for a really big bar mitzvah, maybe another for the high holy days. And then when something special is going on, maybe there will be a different layout. But I certainly don't think it's going to change from week to week. And now I'll shut up and see if Eric wants to add anything.
Yeah, I'm just affirming Carol on this. Although it does have the capacity for changes, we wouldn't be changing it week to week because that is difficult and that's disruptive even to people who are very, very comfortable with changes in the space. That's still disruptive. And so I see it being as something where we can change it for certain types of services where you might want something different. And it's worth noting that the nature of it might be that, you know, if there's a certain type of service and then we have another function in the room that requires moving the chairs, putting the chairs back in the same position for the original service might not be like exactly the same position. It might be generally the same. And, you know, I'm not sure, you know, until you get indentations in the carpet from the chairs sitting there, it's hard to sort of line them up in exactly the same places. I'm not sure how much that matters or not, but that's my prediction.
I mean,
It's an interesting point.
That much.
Eyal, do you want, go on.
I mean, to me, I would just find it mildly annoying that it's changed in some, and I probably wouldn't notice a small change, but other people might find it worse. For example, I cannot pretend to speak for, say, Shai.
I think it's a really good point you bring up, though, that the environment for some people, if there's a lot of change, I do think that's something to be thinking about, is it can make it feel like an unpredictable environment if it's changing a lot. I really appreciate that point. Okay, Chaya, did you want to add something?
Yes. I can't, there we go. I want to turn on my camera for it. Oops. And okay, well, I mean, let me riff off of the change part first, right? I completely agree with that. I think for my son, the change is going to be very hard, and I'm glad that Michael brought that up. And you're speaking to somebody who actually likes the sanctuary exactly the way it is. I think that the Bima is beautiful, and it sort of breaks my heart to think that that's going away. But, you know, my son likes coming to services right now, and I think this change is going to be hard. In terms of the seats, right, the movable seats, changing from week to week will be, you know, I don't know how he'll take it. Maybe it will be fine, but seats that could move around as he's sitting in them, I think would be a disaster, right? I mean, he'll fidget and they'll bounce around and move the chair. And so I don't like that idea of seats that can, you know, move around as he's sitting in them. And then in terms of space, well, okay, so let me go back to the, right, whether you have straight rows or, you know, it's a circular thing. Like, he wants to walk in to the back, right? He doesn't want to have people see him as he walks in, right? He wants to kind of be invisible and just sit in the back. So that, you know, right now the setup is great for that. And he doesn't, while on the one hand, he likes to be asked to get up and do things at the same time, right? He doesn't, if he's given the choice, he'll opt out. For instance, every time the Torah comes around, like he always wants to sit on the aisle, but when the Torah comes around, he's got to move because he can't be near the people who are walking around with the Torah. He's just too embarrassed or too much anxiety, or I don't know what it is, but so sitting in the back, not being forced to do things. But then what really, where he has the hardest time is honestly the Kiddush, where he can't, it's just a free for all, unstructured, and everybody's mingling around and walking this way and walking that way. And he sort of can't bring himself to get in. So and he just wants to hide somewhere and he finds a room. So from that perspective, what would be most helpful for him outside of the sanctuary is a room where he can go and be alone, but be welcome, right? That maybe has a book or two, and he's not gonna have to deal with teenagers sitting in there. Anyway, I think that's our family's experience.
That is so, so, so helpful to hear. And I just want to go back to Martin. You made a comment too about a quiet, safe room separate from the sanctuary. I don't know if you want to, I don't want to call on you, but you did make that comment. Do you want to add anything about that?
Not really. They would be comforting for parents to know that their children are in a quiet area, not too disturbed by gangs of teenagers, marauding teenagers, or younger, junior Viet Congs. I don't know. No, just a quiet, safe place that parents are comfortable with. And a beautiful sanctuary as well.
You know, I have to say, as we talk about some of these things, every time I think about these things, every time I talk about these things, it always reminds me that like having a little bit of like an escape space can be very helpful for lots of different kinds of people at different moments where people just need a little quiet to kind of regroup, or it's just a little too much or too noisy or too something. And, you know, we're talking here about people with neurodevelopmental disabilities, or neurodiversity, but a lot of these things can often apply to many, many kinds of people. Okay, Shoshana, where are you? You've been very patiently waiting with your hand up.
I just have one very quick thing to say, and that's why I put my hand down, is once it's decided where the sound is going to be louder and softer, it's important to make it obvious to people when they come into the room where that is somehow, whether it's a seating chart or color coded, or, I always forget that center area is not great for people with hearing issues. So I wouldn't have known to guide anybody to another spot. So just to make it clear what's happening where.
Yeah, I love that idea. Let me call on people who have raised their hands, but I have a question about seating, which I'll get to afterwards. I'm going to call on people who haven't spoken first, and then we'll come back to people with second. Okay, Debbie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Debbie, and I'm somewhat new to Becky. So personally for me, I have changed to, this is my third shul, right? So when my parents said to me, Debbie, we are leaving your childhood temple, I was heartbroken, I was frustrated, and I was mad. So I went to a new temple and I was still very unhappy. But what happened was people started realizing that it was hard for me, right? So then people would start coming up to me and started talking to me and started being nice to me and like all these things. And like, I think because of that, that really helped me, like get through the change. And so I think as someone who has special needs, I think that like, it would be great for all of us to come together and be like, oh, this person is struggling with this, let me go and help them. Or like, just to like help the anxiety of change, to like relieve that somehow.
That's a super helpful comment. I hope this is your third and final shul. Like you're going to be hanging with us for a bit.
I think you'll see me for a while. I don't know if this is going to be my like last shul, but it will be one of the shuls that I will participate in.
That's great. That's wonderful. How about Carol, and then Daryl, and then Ada and Yair? So Carol, go ahead.
Well, so I have a question on the suggestion of a quiet or safe room outside the sanctuary, and it's also outside the purview of the Sanctuary Redesign Committee, but I would be happy to pass on recommendations to other people who might want to take this on. I'm just trying to understand. So it would be a designated quiet room, and everyone in there would be quiet for people who don't want to be around a lot of other people. However, if there are a number of folks who need to use the quiet room, does that in itself pose a problem? Just having, if 6 or 8 or 10 people need to use the quiet room all at once, does it no longer feel like a safe, quiet space for some of those folks? I'm just wondering.
I'm going to say one thing, which is, and I do want to make sure people understand, like, this is like great conversation. We should just talk about everything, but not all of this does fall within the redesign committee. I feel like if there's so many people flocking to the quiet room that it's like 10 people, I think we have to look at why are so many people needing to be in a quiet room. Like, to me, it would tell me, oh, there's something going on that feels like we should be adjusting in the larger environment if there's massive numbers of people flocking to the quiet room. That's just one perspective. It would tell me something about the environment maybe not working. Daryl, and then
in listening, there were a couple of things that I wrote down. I haven't been part of the discussions of the physical layout of the space, so some of this may have been certainly commented on before, but I'm sensitive to it, so I thought I would bring it up. And one is just a logistical issue, and that is that when you have pretty much a tight semicircle or a U formation, you have a lot of people who are facing other people, which in some circumstances altogether is uncomfortable in terms of whether you're considered special needs, neurodiverse or not, are people looking at me? Am I fidgeting? Is there something wrong with the way I'm looking? And being pulled out of the davening because you're facing people as opposed to able to create a space around yourself where you can focus, and there isn't a lot of other things. There aren't people moving around, and there's not a lot of the environment moving around. So I'm commenting on that actually for my own comfort, and projecting that may be such for other people. Since I'm not there, it's not an issue for me, but I'm projecting that it is an issue for some other people. When it comes to the seating, I know the kind of seating you're talking about that can be separate, but also can hook into an adjacent seat. As a person who's very wide, I will tell you that it would be appreciated by people who are very wide, that not all of those chairs, and a significant number of those chairs, are not chairs with armrests, so that so that people who are wider or need that space, either because they need their personal space to be wider or they need their physical space to be wider, that there's the allowance for a spread across more than one seat, or the separation of those seats easily for someone's comfort without making them embarrassed by the fact that they need to find a situation like that, that can accommodate them physically or emotionally, especially in a situation where you have people who are facing each other and watching as each person walks in and sits down and adjusts themselves, etc. So those are the two things that had to do with seating that have to do with emotional issues. The issue of the space, I put in the category of emotional issues more than physical, because the physical necessity to have to find that kind of seating in a room where either you're comfortable with the people who are around you, or you're a brand new person, or you're coming for a simcha, is very anxiety producing. And it's a barrier to being comfortable and being able to get into the davening and feeling part of the kihila. One more thing I will say, since there were quite a few comments about designing the sound such that it can be spread in a particular way, or that certain areas are quiet and certain areas are more robust, you should, I'm going to suggest, and it may have been suggested already, that if you're going to have seating that's movable so that you can have different arrangements in that room, that means the sound is going to change relative to how the room is set up and how the seating is put together. And so that if you expect that a goal of that kind of seating is the versatility of it, and you're concerned about the sound, then getting a sound system where you can change that balance according to how the room is set up will be important if these kinds of needs to sound sensitivity are near the top of a priorities list. That's it.
Those are great points. Okay, Ada and Yair.
Yeah, thanks. Ada says, so I had one thing and Ada had another thing. So I wanted to say something about the idea of a kind of an intermediate idea between being in the sanctuary and being in some kind of different space, which is that I would think it might be helpful in the sanctuary to have a kind of differentiated space where someone could be, where they're a little bit further from the activity of davening, but still connected. And what I'm thinking of as a model, if you look in the library where the morning minyanim are held, it's a library. There's a table. There's a bunch of bookshelves with interesting books. If you're not exactly focused on davening, you could go and learn something, right? Do some Jewish learning over in the corner by the bookshelf. And I like that as a model for what could be happening in the sanctuary, a kind of corner of the sanctuary where there are some bookshelves, where some of the books are actually there, and where someone who is fidgety or needs to take a little break can be there, and there can be kind of a way to feel like you're still part of the community in a way which is authentically Jewish, actually, but which may not be sitting and davening in the center. So I thought that might be helpful for some people.
Ada, before you say your thing, I want to just ask, you're in a space like that, we had talked about, having things like this, like even sometimes these somewhat semi-transparent screens that really separate. Is that a good idea? Is that unnecessary? Is that shaming to people? Like, you know what I mean? Like it really feels like for people to be able to be in a space that's different and private, but still can hear what's going on or don't need it.
That had not occurred to me. That feels a little too separating for me, at least for my own intuition. But, I can only speak for my experience.
Yep. Okay, Ada, go ahead.
I just want to say that, Eyal has another point to make entirely, but when we first talked about this meeting and we had a conversation at dinner and there was this whole discussion about how deep the U is and is the bima here at the nose or here at the forehead or whatever it is. The other thing that we talked about is exactly what Daryl said, which is that everybody's looking at everybody else. If you get up and fidget, everybody sees you fidget. And for some people, that's very, very uncomfortable. And for some people, it's not as uncomfortable because they're maybe not noticing that everybody's noticing them fidget, but it might be very disruptive to the rest of the kehillah, to watching somebody fidget constantly. And so we talked about the fact that maybe having both for the sound quality, for the, and I know you're going to try different configurations, but for the sound quality, for the issue of like having to twist your body and how far you have to twist it to watch the people, and for the issue of seeing other people all the time, that a wider you with a more front-faced person might be better than this kind of everybody surrounds the bima. So I just wanted to thank Daryl for having brought that up and add our voices to that one, because that came up in our discussion too.
Okay, these are such amazing ideas and comments that people are making. I see that Donna, Eyal, and Ilana have their hands up. If I could ask you guys to keep your comments brief, because I want to pose a question afterwards and I want to make sure we finish at 8:30, right? So I want to make sure we sort of are respectful of time. So Donna, then Eyal, and then Alana, and then I'm gonna pose a question to the group and add a few things. You're muted, Donna. Are you saying you don't want to say anything, or?
I do. Okay. Okay. So I like what people said, and it goes back to what I said initially and gives me the thoughts to expand on it. One is the kiddish. That's really a big problem. Everybody, just even getting the food and where you're going to eat the food. So one thought, I forget exactly where what's now the curtain is going to be compared, but like with Yair said, because my daughter said, you know, if there could be some little tables and chairs in a different place where people could eat their kiddish and not be seen, kind of. But it's also the place where they could sit during services and, you know, but be part of the room. So that, you know, I think that somehow can integrate. But the other thing is, we once went to a synagogue in Austin. It happened to be funded, it was Michael Dell's synagogue, you know, Dell Computers. So apparently it was built with unlimited funds. It appeared to be, it was beautiful. But two of the things they had, one is they had in the back, it wasn't for neurodiversity, I don't think, it was for kids, but they had a glassed in room where the sound was, you know, came in to the room, but it prevented I think in that case, it prevented the noise of the kids from being a disruption to the sanctuary. But it also could be a place where a quiet room right within the sanctuary where people could observe but not be observed. Again, if too many people wanted to use it, it could be a problem. But that was one thing they had. And the other thing they had, something I find a little bit not terribly, but a little disruptive, is when the kids finish Shane Kello Hainu and they have to run and find a seat. I don't know, it doesn't bother me, but it seems very scattered and you know, sort of nerve-wracking. So one of the things they had in the synagogue, and I think if we use the current model where we have you know, a short step or steps onto the bima, it was a designated space for the kids to go. After, you know, while they're doing Kaddish or whatever, they went and sat on that step, and it eliminated the scurrying all over the congregation at that point. So I thought those were, I remember being just flabbergasted by how those innovations were so clever.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Eyal and Alana, and Isaiah, I see your hand up, but I'm going to ask you to hold on that for a moment because I do want to mention a few things and ask a question. So we got, again, trying to keep your comments brief. Eyal, you go, and then Alana after that.
Right. What material are the seats going to be made out of? It's just that plastic covered foam tends to make me very uncomfortable to sit on. I'm fine with basically anything else. Hard plastic, leather, fabric, all fine. But plastic on foam, it makes me feel all sweaty.
What is the fabric? That's a great question.
Me too, Eyal. Me too. I stick to it. It's not fun. I think everything we're looking at. Lynn can correct me if I'm wrong, because Lynn Brotman is leading the research on chairs. But I think that everything we're looking at is some type of fabric, a wood frame, some type of upholstered seats.
Thanks.
Yes, some kind of upholstered seat. Yes, and also we are taking into consideration the amount of, and I apologize, my camera's not working. So I'm Lynn Brotman. Taking into consideration some chairs with arms, because elderly need arms, and some chairs without arms, so that people who want to sit maybe even close to their children or whatever, lots of different reasons. So this is all fabulous information, and also the strength of the chair. So they don't wobble and they don't you know, make noise and all that, and also the arrangement. So my ears are open. I'm really excited about all this information. So nice to see everyone.
Ilana, do you want to add something?
I just want to quickly say I really like Yair's suggestion of having a table or like a small play area where if the children are of a certain age, it could be in the sanctuary, and Michael was mentioning how Shy often looks at books and puzzles, and that was something I personally used to do when I was little, like meaning I would be sitting next to my mother in the sanctuary, but then after I learned to read, in order to keep me quiet, she would put children's books either in a bag that was on the floor in between her and myself, or if there's no one else in the same aisle as us, she would put the bag on the chair one seat over from me. And then I would be able to just grab a book from the bag and start reading, and that would keep myself quiet during davening. So it seems like both Michael and I really like his suggestion.
Okay, guys, this is amazing. So I will tell you, I have one question I want to pose to the group, but it's interesting. There's things that didn't come up that I'm sort of surprised didn't come up. Lighting issues, that's often so triggering. I mean, in my experience, that is often so triggering to people. It did not come up. We're not going to talk about them now, but in terms of sound, it was also about sound reduction with the kind of carpeting and what's on the floor. I didn't hear much about that. I did hear about the chairs. It's very interesting. There are places around where there is autism design that actually purposefully put in things like rocking chairs, you know, sort of quiet rocking chairs, because it helps people who do have a desire for movement. But it's funny because I felt like I heard the opposite here. Sensory toolkits are very visual clutter, a lot of things that I haven't heard really coming up here, but color palettes actually seem like sometimes very important. Odor even. Anyway, so those are just things that in the course of looking at autism design often come up. And I would really encourage people, well, if you have, after this conversation, if you have thoughts, like, I hope this is okay, Carol, I think just send them along. And honestly, if they're not completely related to the redesign, but they're good for the shul, send them anyway. It just doesn't mean they'll be acted on tomorrow and that it may not be within the purview. All right, here's a question. I'm going to just say in our last few minutes, just rapid fire answer them quickly and succinctly, but I want to know also what is working right now at Becky from a neurodiverse design perspective, not just what's working at Becky. There's a lot that's working well at Becky, but what's working right now from a neurodiverse design perspective that you want to make sure doesn't get eliminated in this redesign? Are there things that you feel like, gosh, that's so great from a neurodiverse design perspective? Don't get rid of that. Just call those out because we have so little time. Michael, do you have something to add on that one?
May not like the answer. Shai really likes the stage.
Likes the stage. Okay. Current seating. Privacy barrier. Other things that are working and you go, gosh, let's just not design on the podiums, on the bima. Oh, like the things, the coverings, they are beautiful if that's what you're talking about. What else do people feel is working? And you go, again, from a neurodiverse design perspective, that you say, let's not change that. Are there other things? Calm color palette. Yeah, colors, they do matter. You can say them too. You can unmute and just call them out if you want.
I think based on what people are saying, one of the things that works for us is we have this big space at the back of the seating area. And some people can, especially since COVID, some people can sit back there and have plenty of room. where they're separate, but they're still part of it. And that is something that seems to have been working.
Yeah, so somehow I feel like, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, whoever was speaking.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I saw someone put it in the comments, the movie theater type chairs we have now that go up and down. I use them to sort of semi-stand because my knees are bad, so that during the long part of the service, without having to actually sit down, I can sort of sit on the chair that's sort of in the up position, you know? Anyway, but someone else liked that type of chairs too. And I know the kids love pushing them up and down, but.
I will say that, you know, the one thing is if you have that kind of any kind of seating, but then you lean on it, but it's movable, is you might end up moving the whole row. So I agree.
Yeah, no, we don't want it now, the way they are.
Now it's good.
Quite
if
usable.
that happens later, then we'll move the whole row. So there will be no leaning on seats later, which could be a problem in terms of falls too for elderly people.
Well, I think we're at time, so I want to turn this back to you, Carol, and sort of just thank people for their really fabulous ideas and talking about their experiences and ideas. That I learned a lot from what people were saying, and I'll turn it back to you, Carol, to take us out.
I agree. This was really fantastic. Thank you so much for all of the ideas and feedback. I just put a note in the chat. I just want to note that in addition to the upsides of the current seating that we have, there are some serious downsides. We have very long rows with very little room between the rows. So it's hard, even for, you know, someone like me, I don't have a lot of mobility problems. It's hard to get in and out of the rows. As a result, everyone wants to sit on the aisle. We don't have that many aisle seats. It's actually a safety hazard. If we ever needed to get out quickly in an emergency, we can't. If you're in the middle of a row with a bunch of people, we can't get out quickly. So those are some downsides, and that, yeah, Yara and Ada are pointing out we can make more aisles and have shorter rows. We can't with the pews that we have right now. That said, most of the discussion was not about whether we should keep or change the seats. Most of the discussion was other stuff that was really, really helpful. And the comments about the seats are also helpful. And I really appreciate everyone making time to help us think this through. And if you have more thoughts that come to you, please do send us an email. It's, I put it in the chat, sanctuaryredesign@becky.org. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Carol, for leading the conversation.
Nice to see everybody. Yeah. Be
Thanks
well.
Carol Weitzman.
Cool.
Nice to see everyone. Thank you, Carol.
Everybody.
Thank you, everybody. This was so good. It's great. Good night.
Thank you.
Carol, I'm going to save chat for you.
Great. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Carol, thanks so much.